Have you ever poured your heart into a home painting, walls, balancing budgets, baking cinnamon rolls, only to feel like a stranger in the very place you helped build? Have you ever woken before dawn, apron in hand, ready to nurture the next generation, and wondered if you still belong? What would you do if the family you supported so quietly suddenly told you, "You don't get a say under our roof, I'm Marjorie"? And not long ago, I found myself staring at those exact words, echoing down my hallway. 2 years after losing my husband to cancer, I packed my life into a suitcase and drove across Colorado, eager to help my son and daughter-in-law as they welcomed their second child. I arrived full of love, ready to cook, clean, and chip in, just like I always had. At first, everything was perfect. Little hands grabbing for my apron, sleepy heads on my shoulder, and genuine smiles that reminded me why I'd become a grandmother. But then the tone shifted. The garage door left open turned into "Mom, you left the garage door open again." Family photos quietly moved to a dusty corner. I was removed from the group chat that planned every soccer practice, every birthday party. Meal plans were drawn up without me. And worst of all, the phrase, "You're just a guest," became a constant refrain. I tried to keep the peace. Polite smiles, silent apologies, extra batches of oatmeal. But that label "guest" cut deeper each time I heard it. So I made a decision that changed everything. I froze the trust account I'd set up to cover groceries, tuition, and utilities. I didn't do it out of spite. I did it because I finally remembered who I was and what I deserved. In this video, we'll walk through that journey together. We'll explore how simple acts of kindness can become weapons of entitlement, why boundaries matter, even with the ones you love most, and how reclaiming your independence can open the door to unexpected freedom. Along the way, I'll share the turning point when silent support became silent suffering, how a single phone call to my financial advisor became an act of self-respect, what life looks like when you finally pour yourself into a new chapter. This isn't just my story, it's a reminder for anyone who's ever felt invisible in their own home. It's for the caregivers who pour out without refilling, the mothers and grandmothers who wonder if their voice still matters. So let's get started. Together, we'll discover how a plate of oatmeal sparked a transformation, how an empty bank balance taught a valuable lesson, and how letting go can sometimes be the bravest choice of all. Are you ready to reclaim your place at the table? Let's find out what happens next. Have you noticed how many empty nests have started to fill back up? In recent years, it seems like grandparents, adult children, and even great-grandparents are all under the same roof, sometimes by choice, sometimes by necessity. I certainly didn't plan to become part of that statistic, but here I am, living proof that family dynamics can shift at any moment, and often when we least expect it. When my husband passed away 2 years ago, I thought I'd spend my retirement traveling to see old friends, reading every novel on my bookshelf, and indulging in hobbies I'd put off for decades. But life had other plans. My son and daughter-in-law were expecting their second child, and they asked if I would move in to help with the baby and the bills. It sounded like the perfect opportunity. I'd be close to family, I'd have purpose, and I'd get to spoil my grandchildren rotten. I soon learned, however, that I wasn't alone in making that choice. According to recent surveys, roughly 1 in 6 U.S. households now includes at least 2 adult generations living together. Whether it's economic pressures after the 2020 downturn, skyrocketing real estate costs, or the simple desire to stay connected across generations. Multi-generational living has become a defining feature of modern American life. Take my friends in Boston, for example. Carol and Jim, both in their early 70s, sold their suburban home when their granddaughter's college tuition bill arrived. They downsized into a second-floor apartment above their daughter's townhouse, sharing morning coffee routines and weekend movie nights. They gain companionship and a sense of purpose. Their daughter gains childcare help and a bit of breathing room when her corporate travel schedule kicks in. Everyone benefits, or so it seems on the surface. In my case, the arrangement seemed like a dream. I arrived in Colorado Springs on a crisp fall morning with 2 suitcases and a toolbox in the trunk of my car. Between brushing fresh paint onto baseboards and unpacking my favorite porcelain teapot, I felt energized. I set up my grandma's station in the guest room, storybooks on the nightstand, a basket of crafts by the lamp, and a soft throw on the armchair, where I planned to rock the baby to sleep. I was ready to pour out everything I had, until the lines between my home and their home began to blur. That blurring of boundaries is one of the most common challenges families face when they choose to live together. What starts as mutual support can morph into confusion over chores, money alone time, and authority. Who decides the dinner menu? Who pays for the utilities? And just as importantly, who gets to hang the family photos on the wall? I remember in my first week there, I noticed our group chat buzzing with messages about the kids' soccer practice, a birthday party reminder, and plans for a neighborhood potluck. Pulse racing. I reached for my phone, only to realize I'd been removed. No invitation, no explanation, just silence. It stung, I won't lie. In that moment, I felt like an outsider in my own family's digital world. And I wasn't the only one. Carol and Jim's daughter, Sarah, admitted she hesitated before sending that group chat invite. She wanted privacy, she explained later, and feared being judged for overstepping household decisions. It's a delicate dance, wanting to help, wanting to protect, yet worrying that too much transparency might feel like intrusion. That tension between togetherness and autonomy is at the heart of every multi-generational household. When I look back, I can see how easy it was to slip from feeling welcomed into feeling watched. My offers to cook dinner turned into a checklist. Did you buy organic milk? My suggestions for weekend outings became demands for permission. I went from beloved grandmother to unpaid housekeeper overnight. But before we dive into the twists and turns of my personal journey, let's pause for a moment and acknowledge why so many families still choose this path. First, there's the undeniable financial relief. Sharing rent or mortgage payments, splitting utility bills, and pooling resources for groceries can ease the burden on younger families trying to pay down student loans or save for a home. Grandparents, in turn, often bring a stable income, pension, Social Security, or savings that can smooth out the bumps in the family budget. Beyond money, there's emotional and practical support that no dollar amount can quantify. Grandparents can step in for emergency childcare, ferry kids to school, or offer seasoned advice on everything from college applications to relationship woes. And for seniors who may worry about isolation as friends move away or health concerns rise, living with family can provide daily human connection that brightens each morning. Yet for all its benefits, multi-generational living demands clear communication and defined boundaries. Without those guardrails, even the kindest intentions can lead to resentment. I've heard stories of families who set up house rules on day one, posting chore charts on the fridge, designating personal spaces, and agreeing on a weekly meeting to address grievances. Those families thrived. Others who treated multi-generational living as an extended vacation found themselves stuck in power struggles over whose laundry soap to use or which TV channel to watch. Listen to me. You can't rely on goodwill alone. You need plans. You need conversations. You need signed agreements in some cases. And you need to honor each person's contributions, whether it's babysitting time, financial support, or simply the emotional labor of listening to someone's worries over a cup of tea. Over the next 29 minutes, we'll explore how I navigated those challenges, the mistakes I made, and the lessons I learned. We'll look at how one simple phrase, "You don't get a say under our roof," can become a turning point. We'll see why I decided to freeze the trust account I'd created, how I reclaimed my voice, and the surprising peace that followed when I finally set out on my own. Along the way, I'll share practical tips and real-world examples to help you decide if multi-generational living could work for your family and how to make it succeed. But first, let's zoom in on the financial foundation I built before I ever packed a bag for Colorado. Because the next time we meet around the tea, I want you to know exactly how silent generosity can morph into quiet turmoil, and what you can do to prevent that from happening in your own home. I've always believed that love can be measured in the small things. Freshly baked muffins waiting in the morning, a well-timed phone call to check in, or quietly covering a bill just to ease someone's burden. When my son and daughter-in-law invited me to move in, I didn't hesitate. I set up a trust account in my name, with myself as sole trustee, to ensure that groceries, utilities, and the children's preschool tuition would be paid on time every month. It felt like the perfect solution. I could give generously while keeping clear records of where my pension and savings were going. A trust can sound complicated, but at its heart, it's simply a legal arrangement that lets one person, the trustee, manage assets, money, property, investments for the benefit of others, the beneficiaries. In my case, the beneficiaries were my grandchildren and my son's household. Because I was the trustee, I retained the authority to make deposits, approve withdrawals, and even suspend the account if I chose. It was my way of blending generosity with responsibility. I'll be honest, I was proud of that trust. It felt modern and savvy. No more handing over cash with vague promises. No more wondering whether the tuition check arrived on time. Every month, my advisor sent me statements showing exactly how each dollar was spent. I could see the Whole Foods grocery runs the Xcel energy bill for heating those chilly Colorado nights, the tuition charges from the preschool, line by line, all authorized by me. But over time, that sense of control became a double-edged sword. My quiet contributions faded into the background. They became the norm, something taken for granted rather than appreciated. I remember inviting my daughter-in-law to review the trust paperwork with me, hoping she'd feel reassured that everything was transparent. Instead, she barely skimmed the pages, then looked up and said, "Mom, you worry too much. We've got this." In that moment, my role shifted from protector to redundant. My oversight no longer needed my gift, no longer noticed. I learned later that this pattern isn't unique. I spoke with Linda, a Rhode Island grandmother, who set up a similar trust to help her daughter's family through an unemployment crisis. Linda thought she was offering a lifeline. Instead, her daughter used the funds so seamlessly that she forgot to say thank you. or even think twice before spending. Eventually, Linda discovered her account drained faster than planned because there were no co-trustees or spending limits. She'd funded lavish family dinners, increased streaming subscriptions, and a brand new set of golf clubs for her son-in-law, none of which she'd intended to cover indefinitely. What went wrong for Linda, and almost for me, was a lack of guardrails. I'd created the trust with the best of intentions, but without clear spending parameters or periodic check-ins. We trusted each other's judgment so fully that we overlooked the human tendency to extend generosity until it hurts and then expect more. Here's what I wish I'd known from the start. Define the scope. Decide exactly what the trust will cover. Groceries, utilities, school fees, entertainment budgets. Be specific. Set spending limits. Talk to your financial advisor about caps on discretionary spending so that the account can't be tapped for unplanned indulgences. Schedule regular reviews. A quarterly or semi-annual meeting with your beneficiaries helps catch drift before it becomes a problem and keeps your generosity visible. Consider co-trustees. Adding another family member or trusted friend as a co-trustee can create checks and balances without undermining your role. When the trust ran smoothly, it felt like magic. When it ran dry or was treated like an ATM, it felt like betrayal. And that sting became one more push toward change. Yet, I don't regret setting it up. On the contrary, I learned that structured generosity can be a safety net, but only if you maintain the net's integrity. In families, money carries as much emotional weight as it does practical value. It can symbolize security, love, and trust, but it can also sow seeds of entitlement if left unchecked. I also learned that generosity without dialogue can turn silent support into silent resentment. My son, a thoughtful man who always called me Mom, with genuine warmth, rarely spoke about the trust unless something went awry. I assumed that absence of conversation meant everything was fine. In reality, it meant they felt no need to express gratitude. They simply expected the support to continue without question. One evening, after a particularly tense holiday meal, I found myself asking my advisor whether there was an easy way to pause the trust without alerting anyone immediately. I wasn't planning a coup. I just wanted a moment to catch my breath and reassess. He reminded me that as sole trustee, I had that power, but cautioned that sudden freezes can feel like betrayal. Yet sometimes a pause is the only way to reset expectations. In finance, we often hear the phrase house money, referring to winnings that feel less important because they weren't your original investment. In families, it's easy to treat gifted money as house money, less precious, more expendable. That mindset was contagious in my household. My steady stream of payments became the backdrop, the safety net that no one ever saw as fragile. When gratitude fades, entitlement grows. By the time I realized how deeply the trust had altered our family dynamics, it was almost too late. My contributions were expected without acknowledgement. My yes was taken as a guarantee. The trust account felt less like a gift and more like an invisible leash, tying me to constant, unending obligations. Still, setting up that trust wasn't a mistake, it was a lesson. It taught me the value of clarity, the necessity of boundaries, and the importance of maintaining open communication about even the most loving gestures. In fact, that trust became the instrument of my own empowerment when I finally decided to freeze it. Suddenly, the balance of power shifted back to me, as it had been designed to do. But money alone doesn't tell the whole story. Beneath the surface of financial transactions lies a web of emotions: pride, gratitude, shame, obligation. In the next section, we'll explore how those emotions played out in the daily rhythms of cooking, cleaning, and caregiving acts I believed were expressions of love, until they became the very things that pushed me to reclaim my voice. Transitioning from money to moments, let's turn our attention to the invisible labor that so many caregivers perform, often overlooked, sometimes resented, but always at the heart of what it means to live together as family. In Section 3, we'll dive into my shift from beloved matriarch to just a guest, and how small acts of care can sometimes become the biggest sources of tension. When I first stepped through that front door, I felt like I'd come home. The scent of fresh paint mingled with the faint aroma of pine from the Christmas wreath my daughter-in-law had hung just days earlier. I unpacked my favorite casserole dish and set it in the cabinet next to hers. By evening, I'd whipped up a pot roast that filled the house with savory warmth. My grandson beamed up at me through his toddler curls, and my granddaughter ran circles around my feet, giggling with delight. In those moments, I was exactly who I'd always been, the family's matriarch, the woman whose kitchen was a haven and whose arms were a refuge. Over the next few weeks, my days fell into a comforting rhythm: dawn coffee and oatmeal, prep school drop-offs, midday laundry folds, afternoon crafts, dinner on the table by 6. In between, I balanced my checkbook and reviewed the trust account statements, ensuring that every utility bill, grocery run, and preschool tuition payment was handled. I felt useful, appreciated, and frankly happier than I had in years. But then something subtle began to shift. It started with offhand comments. "Mom, you forgot to lock the back gate again," my daughter-in-law would say, voice clipped as she ushered the kids into the car. I'd apologize quietly and lock it, but afterwards, I'd wonder if she ever saw the gate as more than an invitation. Then came the small exclusions. One morning, I walked into the kitchen to find a new family schedule taped to the refrigerator, listing soccer practice, piano lessons, and grocery shopping, but my name was nowhere on it. I asked about it later, and she smiled and said, "We just thought it'd be easier this way." Easier for whom, I wondered. Soon I realized I was being taken for granted. I would load the dishwasher and find it emptied by the time I returned. I'd wash the counters and notice smudges hours later. My offers to run errands were met with, "No, we're fine," even when they weren't. The children's laughter that once filled my heart now felt like a reminder of my invisibility. They still loved me, but the adults around me had begun to see me as someone whose kindness could be assumed rather than celebrated. I spent years caring for others as an ICU nurse, as a mother raising a son, and now, as a grandmother, I understood the powerful pull of invisible labor. It's the way a clean floor goes unnoticed until it's dirty again, the way a full pantry becomes the backdrop for daily life rather than the miracle it is. We who provide care often become part of the wallpaper, always there, rarely noticed. One afternoon, I peeled carrots for soup while my daughter-in-law sat at the table scrolling on her phone. She didn't look up when I called out, "I'm going to drop off these leftovers at your office." I slipped the containers into her bag without a word and walked out. That evening, I learned she'd left them at home unclaimed. "I didn't see them," she said later, barely meeting my eye. "Sorry." I wasn't angry, not yet, but I began to feel a hollow ache every time I offered help. Each unacknowledged casserole, Each ignored bowl of oatmeal chipped away at my sense of belonging. I kept thinking, I pay for the groceries, I fold these towels, I mend those sleeves, and still, I was just a guest. Perhaps the clearest example came one holiday season when I offered to host Christmas dinner. I envisioned a sparkling table with red candles and my grandmother's china plates. I spent hours roasting turkeys and glazing ham, baking pies, and whipping cream. On Christmas morning, I peeked into the kitchen, only to find that plans had changed. They were ordering takeout, too busy to host. When I asked about it, my daughter-in-law said, "We thought you'd appreciate a break after all your hard work." A break for me, or for them that evening, as I watched the family crowd around styrofoam containers instead of my carefully arranged dishes. I felt my role crystallize, invisible. Beloved by the children, yes, but dispensable by the adults. It was at that moment I understood a hard truth. Invisible care carries hidden costs. When we pour ourselves into the well-being of others without drawing clear boundaries, what begins as generosity can morph into expectation. People start to assume your labor is limitless, your patience inexhaustible, and your contributions permanent. I reached out to friends for perspective. My neighbor Ellen lives with her son and his young family in Oregon. She told me she experienced something similar when her daughter started a new job with long hours. "I'd drive the kids to school, cook dinner, keep the house running," she said, shaking her head. Then she asked me, "Are you going to be okay with living in the guest room indefinitely?" It hit me like a ton of bricks. For Ellen, the question was a turning point. She realized she'd allowed herself to be relegated to temporary, even though she'd been there for 6 months. That's when I decided to start documenting my contributions. I kept a simple notebook on the kitchen counter, jotting down each time I paid a bill, cooked a meal, or cleaned a room. It wasn't for them to see, at least not at first. It was for me. I needed proof that my efforts mattered, so I wouldn't lose sight of my own worth as the gratitude around me faded. Here are some quick lessons I took from that time. Acknowledge your labor. Even small acts, loading the dishwasher, refilling the bird feeder, deserve recognition. Don't let them slip into background noise. Keep a visible record. A shared family calendar or chore chart can help everyone understand who's doing what and prevent thankless expectations. Speak up early. When invisible care starts to feel like obligation, have a gentle conversation. "I'm happy to help, but I'd appreciate knowing how my efforts fit into our plans." By the time I'd filled half that notebook, I realized something else. Invisible care can erode your sense of self faster than you think. I looked in the mirror one morning and hardly recognized the woman who had once been my proud, independent self. My shoulders slumped from carrying too many unspoken burdens, and my smile had become something I wore out of habit, not joy. I knew I needed to reclaim my role as valued family member or step out of the shadows altogether. The next shift in my journey would come when words replaced invisible slights, a single phrase that crystallized my outsider status and propelled me toward change. In the next section, we'll dive into the moment everything changed, the breaking point, when silence ended and voices were heard. We'll explore why those words stung so sharply and how that confrontation set the stage for the transformation that followed. Let's uncover how one simple statement can become the catalyst for reclaiming not just a place in the house, but a sense of belonging in our own lives. I've learned that sometimes it isn't a slap or a slammed door that hurts the most. It's a few simple words spoken in passing that cut deeper than any raised voice. For me, That moment came on an otherwise ordinary morning, standing in the hallway just outside the guest room door. I was setting out bowls of oatmeal for the kids when I heard her voice echo through the house. "You're lucky we let you live here," she hissed. "You don't get a say under our roof." In that instant, time slowed. The hinge of the guest room door groaned as it swung shut, and I could feel the vibration all the way through the floorboards beneath my feet. My heart pounded so fiercely, I thought the kids might hear it. The words replayed in my mind, not an accusation of an unmade bed or a burned casserole, but an assertion of power, a reminder that in her eyes, I was less than family. It was the culmination of weeks, no months, of tiny slights and growing tension. But hearing it so clearly, so unapologetically, was my breaking point. I realized then that all the invisible labor I'd poured into this home, all the meals, the bills, the bedtime stories, had not earned me respect. Instead, it had given them a sense of entitlement, a belief that I would always be here, that my contributions weren't truly choices, but obligations. And when they needed me, I would answer without question. Words have a way of crystallizing feelings we've been ignoring. Before that moment, I'd been trying to smooth over every rough patch with a smile, or by baking an extra batch of muffins. After that moment, I knew I couldn't stay silent any longer. Let me walk you through what happened and why those words were so devastating. The weight of full ownership. When she said, "You don't get a say under our roof," she was staking a claim. Ownership goes beyond a mortgage or a deed. It extends to who makes decisions, whose voice resonates in the hallways. I had helped fund every utility bill, every preschool tuition payment, every grocery trip. Yet, on that morning, I realized the house belonged to them alone. My financial generosity, structured, transparent, heartfelt, hadn't translated into a seat at the table. The psychology of belonging is a fundamental human need. We crave acceptance, recognition, and agency in the spaces we inhabit. As a grandmother who once held court over holiday dinners and bedtime rituals, being told I had no say shattered more than my pride. It shook my sense of identity. Suddenly, I wasn't Marjorie, matriarch, caregiver, advisor. I was a guest, someone with a lampshade smile, but no real influence. Everyday echoes. That phrase didn't appear out of nowhere. It was embedded in smaller moments, the way cooking for the family became expected rather than appreciated. How my suggestions for family outings were met with, "We'll think about it," but never acted upon. How I was silently removed from birthday planning texts. These micro-rejections built up like water behind a dam. When the dam finally gave way, those few words poured out with enough force to knock me off balance. A practical example from my friend Ellen's story in Oregon echoes mine. She lived with her daughter's family while recovering from knee surgery. One day, helping her granddaughter with homework, Ellen glanced up to hear Mom, "You're slowing us down." Without looking back, her daughter added, "We need our space." Ellen didn't see it coming. She assumed her help was welcome. That blunt remark prompted her to pack up her things and return to her own home before she lost her sense of worth entirely. Naming the hurt, as painful as it was, that moment gave me clarity. Naming the hurt aloud is the first step to addressing it. Later that day, I called my neighbor, confided in her, and said I felt utterly invisible when I heard those words. Speaking it out loud helped me process the shock and recognize that this was more than familial friction. It was a fundamental breakdown in respect. When silence isn't golden. In many families, we're taught to keep the peace, to swallow our pride for harmony's sake. But silence can allow resentments to fester. By not addressing small wounds, we let them grow until they become gaping sores. My failure to speak up earlier had given my daughter-in-law permission to believe her words wouldn't have consequences. If I'd voiced discomfort at the first offhand comment, "Mom, you left the pantry open," maybe this moment would never have arrived. The power dynamics of family relationships carry an inherent power dynamic that rivals any boardroom. The balance shifts over time. A child grows into an adult. A spouse becomes a widow. Roles evolve. I had once guided my son through scraped knees and school projects. Now he and his wife guided me through where I could and could not fit in. That role reversal was jarring, yet I clung to the wish that love alone would override power plays. Unfortunately, love without boundaries can leave us vulnerable. Short lessons learned. Speak early. Don't let small slights slide into bigger wounds. A gentle, "That comment hurt me," can prevent resentment from building. Define your role. When moving into a multi-generational home, have a clear conversation about expectations and decision-making authority. Validate your worth. Keep a journal of your contributions. Cooking, caregiving bills, paid to remind yourself that your labor matters. A comparative insight. I spoke with a counselor who works with families in cohabitation arrangements. She told me that the most successful households are those where every adult feels empowered to voice concerns without fear of rejection. They hold weekly check-ins, 15 minutes around coffee, where each person can speak up about frustrations or changes in schedule. That simple ritual allows families to catch tension early and negotiate solutions before feelings harden into grudges. The turning point after hearing those words, I realized I had a choice: continue to shrink myself into a guest role or reclaim my agency. Silence was no longer acceptable. Neither was passive agreement. I decided to pause, to reflect, and then to act. At first, I didn't confront my daughter-in-law directly. Instead, I took a solitary walk around the neighborhood, breathing in the crisp Colorado air. I remembered who I was before I packed that suitcase, a spirited woman who raised her son to stand tall, a nurse who advocated fiercely for her patients, an avid gardener who found joy in nurturing life. I wasn't a guest. I was a grandmother, a mother, a woman with experience, wisdom, and value. On returning home, I paused by the guest room door, the same door that had closed so violently that morning. I placed my hand on its cool knob, then turned and headed into the kitchen. That evening, as we sat down for dinner, I offered a simple grace. I'm grateful we can share this meal together. No bitterness, no accusation, just an invitation to recognize what we had in common. It was a small step, but it marked the end of my silence. From there, my next move would be deliberate and decisive. I understood that if I wanted respect, I had to assert it, and that meant involving the very structure I had created for their benefit. In the next section, we'll explore how I use the trust account, my financial gift, to reset expectations, reestablish boundaries, and finally secure the seat at the table that I'd earned. But before we head there, ask yourself, when was the last time you spoke up for yourself? Have you let quiet hurts accumulate until they became impossible to ignore? Remember, words can wound, but they can also heal if we choose to speak them with intention. Now, let's see how intention transformed my actions and set the stage for real change. When the words, "You don't get a say under our roof," echoed down the hallway. I felt as if the walls themselves were closing in on me. In that instant, I knew I needed to reclaim the authority I'd quietly given away. The trust account I'd established as a gesture of love suddenly became the lever by which I could reset the balance of power and remind everyone exactly who held the reins. I'll walk you through how I made that decision, the mechanics of freezing the account, and why it was both a practical and deeply symbolic act. My hope is that if you ever find yourself taken for granted, you'll see how financial boundaries can protect not just your assets, but your self-respect, recognizing the leverage. For months, the trust account had flowed seamlessly. $2,000 here for groceries, $1,800 there for utility bills, $2,300 for preschool tuition. My monthly pension check was deposited directly, and automated transfers covered every household expense without a hitch. Because I was sole trustee, I had full legal authority to authorize or suspend any withdrawal. Most families never pause to think about that power. They see the bank balance, they see the benefits, but they forget who set up the system in the first place. I'd been proud of my foresight, no more late fees, no more forgotten checks. But pride is a quiet thing, and when unacknowledged, it can be eroded without notice. When I heard those hurtful words from my daughter-in-law, I realized that every unspoken resentment, every ignored casserole had grown from the assumption that I'd always say yes. The trust account became the embodiment of that assumption. It wasn't about money anymore. It was about standing up for my voice, my place, and my right to be respected. How to freeze a trust account. If you've never had to do it, the process can seem daunting. Here's how it worked for me. Contact your financial advisor. I called my advisor on the same day I heard those words. He greeted me warmly. "Good to hear your voice." Marjorie and I told him exactly what I wanted to pause. All outgoing transfers from the trust effective immediately. Confirm your authority. As sole trustee, I had the legal documentation to back my request. My advisor reviewed the trust agreement with me briefly over the phone, confirming that no co-trustee had equal withdrawal power. Authorize the freeze. Within 24 hours, every automatic draft, whether it was the electric bill, grocery debit card, or preschool tuition, was halted. The account remained active with all funds intact, but inaccessible to any of the family. Plan your communication. I didn't announce the freeze with fanfare. Instead, I let the natural consequences speak first. Overdue notices, bounced transactions, polite bank apologies. Only after they'd seen the impact did I offer an explanation. I needed time to reassess our household budget and expectations. Offer a path forward. I suggested a family meeting, no accusations, just a review of the trust's purpose and guidelines. If they wanted the funds to flow again, we would co-create a spending plan with clear boundaries and regular check-ins. A Florida family's cautionary tale. I wasn't the first to learn this lesson the hard way. My friend Rosa in Tampa set up a similar trust for her daughter's young family, hoping to ease their burdens after her granddaughter's premature birth. At first, everything ran smoothly. Hospital bills paid, groceries, stocked, car repairs covered. But when Rosa's health declined last year, her daughter assumed the trust would continue indefinitely. One day, Rosa phoned her advisor in distress. She had discovered her account nearly empty. Her daughter had tapped the trust for a new TV, a vacation rental, and health supplements well beyond what Rosa intended. Because she was in a nursing home and had lost her digital access, Rosa had no way to pause the drain. Had Rosa arranged for a co-trustee or set spending limits, she might have avoided that betrayal. Instead, she found herself powerless, her gift transformed into an open-ended subsidy that left her with barely enough to cover her own care. Why freezing matters. Freezing. A trust account isn't an act of cruelty. It's an act of clarity. It says, "This was my gift," but it isn't inexhaustible. Let's talk about what we truly need and what I truly want. For me, that pause forced a reckoning. I stood in the kitchen one evening, watching my daughter-in-law's surprised expression when the electric company called to say their payment didn't go through. Her eyes narrowed in confusion until I stepped into the room and said, "Our household budget needs a reset." That moment led to the family meeting I'd hoped for. We laid out the trust's original intentions: groceries, utilities, tuition. We discussed overages, movie subscriptions, restaurant dinners, impulse buys that hadn't been in the plan. I proposed a modest spending cap on discretionary items and a quarterly review. My son, usually so diplomatic, spoke up. "We never realized how seamless you wanted this to be. We thought it would always be there." His words confirmed what I already felt. Generosity without boundaries becomes entitlement. Balancing love and boundaries. One of the hardest parts of this decision was worrying I'd hurt my family's feelings. I love my son and grandchildren dearly, and I wanted to help, not punish. That's why I approached the freeze carefully. No drama, no late-night confrontations. Instead, I used the pause to invite conversation. I framed it as a shared problem. We needed to plan for future expenses together, so no one felt ambushed by bills or resentful of expectations. In our weekly check-ins, we started tracking actual spending side by side. I showed them how the grocery budget could stay within reason if we chose seasonal produce instead of out-of-season berries. We compared utility usage month to month and brainstormed small ways to conserve energy. And importantly, they thanked me out loud for being transparent and patient through the process. Lessons to carry forward. Authority isn't meanness. Stepping in to pause. Funds may feel harsh, but it's a way to protect relationships from covert resentment. Clarity prevents conflict. Written guidelines. What's covered, what isn't. How often to review, turn assumptions into agreements. Communication is key. Framing the freeze as a shared budget check-in keeps the focus on solutions, not blame. Empowerment through boundaries. When everyone understands the rules, they're free to enjoy the support without taking it for granted. Freezing that trust account marked a turning point. Not only did it demand accountability from my family, it also reminded me of my own needs. I realized that if I could assert control over my finances, I could assert control over my life. The house that felt like a gilded cage suddenly seemed navigable again. I had proven to myself and to them that love and boundaries can coexist. In the next section, we'll explore what happened when I took that newfound confidence and quietly made my exit. I packed a single suitcase, unlocked the door to my own apartment, and discovered a peace I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't an act of retreat. It was a declaration of self-respect. Join me as I share the story of my quiet exit and the surprising freedom that followed. In the days after freezing the trust account, I felt a curious mix of relief and resolve. I'd never imagined that pausing those monthly transfers would lead me to step entirely out of that kitchen. Yet, that's exactly what happened. I realized that asserting financial boundaries was only half the battle. Reclaiming my voice and my life required a deeper shift. So I began to prepare for what I came to call my quiet exit. Long before moving in with my son's family, I'd quietly purchased a one-bedroom apartment in Colorado Springs, an insurance policy of sorts. I didn't see it as distrust. Quite the contrary. It was a practical safeguard, a place to land, if circumstances ever felt too constricting. I used a portion of my inheritance on the down payment, envisioning a cozy retreat where I could write, read, and sleep without interruption. I took care to choose a building near the local hot springs, imagining weekend visits to soak away the week's stress. When the moment felt right, I packed one suitcase. Inside went my favorite cardigan, the pearl earrings my husband gave me on our 25th anniversary, my well-worn sketchbook, and just enough clothes for a week of mornings, afternoons, and evenings. I left everything else behind: the extra pillows in the guest room, the stack of puzzles in the living room, the countless casserole dishes that had once symbolized my love. I left a note on the kitchen table beneath the salt shaker. Of course, simply reading, "Thank you for reminding me who I really am." No recriminations, no door-slamming goodbyes, just a gentle closing of one chapter. Stepping into my apartment for the first time felt like coming up for air. The front door clicked softly behind me, and I paused to let the silence wash over my shoulders. Sunlight filtered through sheer curtains, illuminating the light wood floors. I'd refinished myself on a lazy summer afternoon. The air smelled faintly of pine from the new shelving I'd installed, and the faint hum of the hot springs 3 blocks away served as a peaceful soundtrack. In that moment, I realized how heavy I'd been carrying invisible burdens and how light I felt without them. Each morning, I brewed a pot of Earl Grey at exactly 7 o'clock. I poured it into my favorite teacup, no competing voices asking, "Can you make me coffee too?" and settled by the window with a view of the rising sun. I'd sketch the skyline or jot thoughts in my notebook, reflections on the day before, ideas for new stories, reminders to call old friends. The stillness became a gift. I found clarity in routines designed solely for my well-being. In the afternoons, I wandered to the hot springs. The water, warm against cool stones, reminded me of my nurse's hands, soothing patients after long shifts. I soaked until my shoulders loosened and my mind quieted. On the walk home, I'd stop by the neighborhood cafe where the barista knew my order, a latte with oat milk, and we'd chat about books or local art shows in soft, friendly tones. No calendars to update, no chore charts to consult, just simple human connection. I wasn't alone in discovering the power of a quiet exit. My friend Marlene in Massachusetts told me how she moved into a refurbished school bus parked on her daughter's property. She'd grown weary of weekend visitors dropping by unannounced. "Grandma, can you watch the kids?" and wanted a private space where she could age on her terms. Marlene's tiny home taught her grandchildren respect for boundaries they knew to text before stopping by, and they valued their time with her all the more because it was a choice, not an expectation. Of course, a quiet exit requires more than emotional courage. It demands practical preparation. First, secure your own space, whether it's an apartment, a mobile home, or even a spare bedroom in a friend's house. Make sure you have the legal and financial means to support that space independently, a stable income, pension, rental revenue, savings, and a simple budget to cover rent, utilities, groceries, and small comforts. Second, plan your departure thoughtfully. A single suitcase avoids drama. A brief, heartfelt note prevents misunderstanding. Third, enlist emotional support. A close friend or counselor who can help you process the transition and remind you of your worth. By mid-morning on the day I moved out, I'd texted my son a single line: "I'm settling into my new place. Thank you for the memories." He replied with concern, "Mom, is everything okay?" And I assured him it was. More than okay, in fact. I felt renewed. I'd stepped away, not out of anger, but out of self-respect. That evening, as I washed dishes alone in my new kitchen, I realized something surprising. I missed their busy household. I missed the murmur of children's laughter down the hall, the clatter of pots and pans, the random invitations to stay for dinner. But I knew I couldn't return until I was certain I'd be treated as a full partner in our family's life, someone whose love came with respect, not assumptions. Leaving quietly doesn't mean cutting ties. It means choosing them on your own terms. In the weeks that followed, I visited my son and grandchildren for coffee dates and park outings. We laughed over spilled ice cream and drawing contests. But I never stayed overnight. I came home each night to my own bed, where I slept without tension or apology. As word of my move spread through friends and neighbors, I received messages of admiration and inquiry. "How did you do it so calmly? I wish I had your confidence." I realized my story could be a beacon for others feeling trapped by their own generosity. That's why I've woven these practical steps and examples into our journey so you too can reclaim autonomy without rancor. In reclaiming my autonomy, I discovered a fundamental truth. We honor ourselves and teach others to honor us by making deliberate choices about where we live, how we give, and whom we let into our daily rhythms. My quiet exit wasn't a betrayal. It was a redefinition of family life, one that balanced love with mutual respect. In the next section, we'll explore the fallout of my departure, the surprise confusion and reckoning that rippled through the household I left behind. We'll see how absence became the catalyst for growth, and how through that reckoning, both my family and I learned lessons no one could teach us otherwise. Let's turn to Section 7, Fallout and Family Reckoning, and discover how a frozen account and an empty guest room reshaped more than just our living arrangements. I'll admit I didn't expect the aftermath of my quiet exit to unfold so dramatically. In the days after I settled into my new apartment, the ripples of my absence and the frozen trust account reached every corner of the household I left behind and forced a reckoning none of us saw coming. It began with a series of unexpected calls and texts. On the third morning, just as I was pouring milk into my cereal bowl, my phone buzzed with a message from the preschool's office. "Hello, Mrs. Patterson. This is Linda at Little Sprouts Academy. We've tried drawing your tuition payment twice this month, and both times the transfer was declined. Please call us as soon as possible to avoid late fees." My first thought was concern for the kids. Would they be turned away from class? I called immediately, assured them the issue was being resolved, and asked about the deadline. They extended it kindly, reminding me that missing a third payment could mean suspension of enrollment. My heart clenched. I never wanted my grandchildren to feel the sting of late tuition like I once felt in my own college days. That same afternoon, I received a more personal text from my son, "Mom, did something happen to the account? The card's not working. Can you call me?" Underneath his casual tone, I sensed worry and perhaps a bit of guilt. I called him back, and he explained how the electric bill hadn't been paid, how the cable company had cut off service, and how they were scrambling to borrow cash from neighbors. When I mentioned the preschool deadline, his voice cracked. "We're trying to figure it out, Mom. I'm sorry this shouldn't have happened. Later that day, an email from the utility company landed in my inbox. Final notice, your account is now past due. Service will be suspended within 48 hours unless payment is received. And just to underscore the gravity, the following morning brought a voicemail from my daughter-in-law. Ajori, it's me. We need help. The fridge is empty. The lights flicker, and the school called again. Please, can we talk? Her voice trembled, and I could almost see her standing in the dimly lit kitchen, holding an empty milk carton. My heart ached. I'd never intended for my actions to cause pain or inconvenience, yet here they were, facing the very challenges I had designed the trust to prevent. I paused before replying, wanting to choose my words carefully. When we spoke that evening, I kept my tone gentle. I'm sorry it got to this point. I needed time to reassess how we were managing expenses. Let's set up a plan to get things back on track and discuss how we can do this together in the future. That conversation opened the door to an honest family meeting. We sat around their kitchen table, the same one where I'd baked countless batches of cinnamon rolls this time, with laptops, bank statements, and notepads spread before us. My son unmuted the autopay for the utility bills, while I arranged for the preschool payment to be processed immediately. We reviewed our shared budget item by item: groceries, tuition, utilities, and discretionary spending. It was the clarity we'd never achieved before, because before we hadn't been forced to. A key turning point came when my daughter-in-law admitted something surprising. I thought the trust would always be there. I never realized how dependent we'd become on you, on the money, on your willingness to cover any overages. Her admission reminded me of the second lesson I learned that week. Dependency can creep up unnoticed until the safety net snaps. We devised a new approach, a modest joint checking account, funded monthly from the trust, capped at a realistic amount, and a small personal allowance for unplanned treats. Anything beyond that would require a quick email request. No guilt, no drama, just transparent communication. Over the following week, neighbors and friends began noticing the change in their household too. One afternoon, Mrs. Vega from down the street knocked on my door. She'd grown fond of my daughter-in-law during play dates and wanted to share her own experience. When my son and I lived with my in-laws, we almost lost our home because I never learned to manage finances. Mom covered every bill. It wasn't until I set boundaries that I understood how to budget and save. Her story mirrored the broader truth that spans generations. When well-intentioned support replaces personal accountability, everyone loses a chance to grow. That neighborly chat blossomed into an invitation. Would I share my journey? At the next community center gathering, they hosted a family finance and boundaries workshop, and I gladly agreed. Standing before familiar faces, retirees, young parents, working professionals, I told my story from the initial trust setup to the quiet exit and the family reckoning that followed. I spoke of vulnerability, of pride, and of the deep relief that comes when loved ones step up responsibly. The room buzzed with nods and gratitude. One attendee, a teenage granddaughter of my friend Helen, whispered after the talk, "Grandma, I never knew it could be this complicated or this empowering." Back at my son's house, something subtle shifted in the weeks that followed. My visits became less about bailing them out and more about genuine connection. We established grandma days where I'd spend 2 hours helping with crafts or reading stories, after which I'd return to my own place. The line between guest and family blurred into a healthy balance, mutual respect. They learned the value of planning ahead. I relearned the joy of giving freely without being taken for granted. Through it all, I discovered another powerful lesson: absence can teach dependency lessons faster than presence ever will. My week-long hiatus had saved their sanity. Once the initial scramble passed, they realized they could juggle bills, prepare meals, and fill the pantry on their own. My role shifted from invisible benefactor to welcome visitor, and suddenly their gratitude felt genuine rather than obligatory. As life settled into a new rhythm, I reflected on how we arrived at this point. Our story had moved from tension and resentment to collaboration and respect, steered not by ultimatums, but by the practical necessity of sorting through the fallout. Each overdue notice, each urgent call became a catalyst for honest dialogue and a reminder that love, untempered by boundaries, can lead to unintended consequences. In the next section, we'll explore how I built a fresh support circle beyond my family, connecting with women who'd walked similar paths. Together we formed Taking Back Tuesdays, a weekly gathering of grandmothers, widows, and caregivers reclaiming their voices. If you've ever felt invisible in a home you helped build, you'll find encouragement and practical guidance in the community I discovered. Let's turn to Section 8, Building a New Support Circle, and see how shared stories became a source of collective strength. After the whirlwind of freezing, the trust account quietly moving out, and weathering the family fallout, I found myself craving connection, and not just any connection, but one rooted in shared understanding. I realized I wasn't alone in this journey. All around me were women, grandmothers, widows, retirees, whose stories mirrored my own in surprising ways. That's when I decided to build a new support circle, something I now affectionately call Taking Back Tuesdays. It started with a simple idea: once a week, gather at the local community center over tea and share our experiences. I posted a notice on the bulletin board, no fanfare, just a neat flyer reading Taking Back Tuesdays, a gathering for women reclaiming their voices. I didn't know if anyone would show up, but I felt certain that if I needed this, others probably did too. The first Tuesday, I arrived early, bringing a box of my husband's favorite Earl Grey and a tin of shortbread cookies. By 1 p.m., 6 women trickled in: Mary, a retired school teacher whose son had moved her into his home after her hip surgery; Linda, from down the street, who'd funded her granddaughter's college tuition; Beatrice, widowed just last year and living with her daughter's family; and 2 others I'd never met. We sat in folding chairs around a long table, steam curling from our teacups, and introduced ourselves. I invited each woman to share a moment when she'd realized her generosity had become invisible, or worse, expected. Some stories were heartbreaking. Mary recounted how her son once snapped at her for raising his walls too loudly when she rehearsed her church choir songs in the living room. Linda described discovering her substantial gift account depleted by gym memberships she never intended to pay for. Beatrice spoke of little notes left on the refrigerator. "Don't open my mail and use your own towels." Reminders that her home had become theirs, not hers. As they spoke, nodding and wiping tears, I realized the power of collective empathy. No one judged, no one minimized. We laughed sometimes, ruefully, at the absurdity of labeling our spoons or reallocating our laundry rooms. And we found comfort in realizing that each of us had faced those same small betrayals, a pivot from appreciation to entitlement, A shift from "thank you, Mom" to "you're in the way, Mom." Building this circle had an immediate practical impact. For one, it gave me a sounding board for ideas. When I wondered whether I should invite my daughter-in-law to join a quarterly budget review, I ran the idea by the group. "Absolutely," Mary said. "Frame it as a team meeting, not an audit." Linda suggested using colorful charts on a magnetic board for easy updates. Beatrice reminded me to pair budget talk with something fun, like a potluck, so it didn't feel too stern. Their suggestions helped me refine my approach and prevented me from second-guessing myself. But there was more. I noticed my own confidence growing with each session. On the third Tuesday, I arrived feeling nervous. I'd invited my son to sit in on the discussion about setting personal boundaries. I wasn't sure if he'd be open, but I wanted him to hear how other families navigated caregiving roles. To my surprise and relief, he showed up. He listened as we talked about co-trustees, household agreements, and the importance of regular check-ins. Afterward, he thanked me and said, "I get it now, Mom. I want us to keep this going." That conversation, fueled by the group's collective wisdom, set a new tone in our family. Over the next months, Taking Back Tuesdays evolved beyond coffee and tears. We added short workshops led by local professionals. An elder law attorney explained simple steps for drafting a power of attorney. A financial coach demonstrated how to create budgets that protect both giver and receiver. A social worker guided us through communication techniques to address tension without conflict. These mini-sessions provided real-world tools, turning our vulnerability into empowerment. One of the most memorable practical exercises involved creating boundary scripts. We each wrote down scenarios we feared: an unannounced drop-in, an offhand comment that stung the feeling of never saying no, and practiced polite but firm responses. For instance, when someone barges in uninvited, you might say, "I love seeing you, but I need a quick heads up next time, so I can be ready to welcome you properly." Or when a child mistakes your patience for permission, you could reply, "I'm happy to help you with that project, but let's schedule a time so I can give you my full attention." Saying those words out loud felt revolutionary. I remember looking around the circle, seeing nods and smiles, and realizing we were no longer voiceless individuals. We were a chorus of self-respecting women. Our group also became a social lifeline. We organized monthly outings, a trip to the botanical gardens in spring, a potluck picnic by the river in summer, a cozy cookie exchange in winter. Those gatherings reminded us that life extends far beyond caregiving roles. Beatrice taught us a new card game she'd learned from her grandchildren. Linda shared her secret recipe for homemade jam. Mary led a sing-along of her favorite folk songs. These moments of joy, laughter, and camaraderie filled our cups, literally and figuratively. Perhaps the most touching development was how the group embraced intergenerational connections. One week, I invited my granddaughter, Sophie, then 8 years old, to join us and share what she loved about time with Grandma. She stood on a little folding chair, beaming, and told us all about our watercolor painting sessions and how I'd read her favorite book, Charlotte's Web, for the 100th time. The women applauded, and I felt a warmth in my heart that I hadn't felt since I first moved out. Sophie's presence reminded me why I'd fought for respect, so that every moment with my grandchildren could be one of joy, not tinged by resentment or obligation. Through Taking Back Tuesdays, I learned a final enduring lesson. Community is the antidote to isolation, guilt, and silence. When we share our stories, we break the spell of shame that convinces us our struggles are unique or our voices worthless. We discover strategies that actually work, not just platitudes. And most importantly, we remind each other that self-care isn't selfish. It's a prerequisite for giving our best to those we love. This circle didn't just transform my life. It reshaped my family's culture. When I returned to my son's home for visits, I noticed subtle differences. My daughter-in-law now greets me with genuine warmth rather than clipped politeness. My son asks my advice rather than assumes he knows best. Birthday invites and group chats include me by name. Those shifts didn't happen overnight, but they grew from the seeds planted in our Tuesday gatherings. As we look ahead, you might be wondering how to find or start your own support circle. Identify a local community center church or library. Post a simple notice. Invite friends and neighbors who might be feeling the same. Offer tea, bring snacks, and open the floor to honest conversation. You'll be amazed at how quickly a handful of women can build each other up, and how that strength radiates into every aspect of life. In our next section, we'll pivot from community support to personal fulfillment beyond caregiving. We'll dive into how reclaiming autonomy and building a network led me to rediscover passions, hobbies, and dreams I'd set aside long ago. Join me in Section 9, Redefining Self-Worth Beyond Caregiving, where we'll explore how giving care can coexist with nurturing the self. For decades, I found my worth in caring for others. As an ICU nurse, I measured my competence by lives saved. As a mother, by milestones cheered. And as a grandmother, by the warmth on little faces when I walked through the door. Even after reclaiming my autonomy and setting boundaries, I realized that for most of my life, I equated my value with service. It was time to ask a different question. Who was I? Beyond caregiving, I began by revisiting hobbies and dreams I'd shelved long ago. In my 20s, I'd sketched landscapes for hours, sunset skies, rolling hills, delicate wildflowers, and carried a small portfolio of drawings. Over the years, that sketchbook gathered dust on a shelf as I devoted myself to night shifts and soccer practices. I dug it out one afternoon and felt a spark of excitement. The pages were blank now, but my pencil felt alive in my hand. I sketched the view from my apartment window, the red brick rooftops, the distant Rocky Mountains. And with each line, I felt a tension release from my shoulders. That simple act of drawing reminded me that creativity doesn't demand perfection. It just demands presence. I set a goal to sketch 3 times a week. Sometimes it was quick, 10-minute studies of my favorite teacup. Other times, I'd spread watercolors across the table and lose myself in mixing hues for autumn leaves. My confidence grew as I shared my work on a modest Instagram account under the handle @MarjorieSketches. The likes and encouraging comments from friends and even strangers felt like gentle affirmations. Yes, you matter. Next, I turned to writing. I'd kept a journal since my son was small, but I'd never tried my hand at something more structured. One morning, over a cup of Earl Grey, I began drafting an essay about the day I realized I was just a guest in my own home. The words flowed surprisingly easily. Vivid memories of slamming doors, silent soufflés left uneaten, and the moment I froze the trust account. Writing became a way to process emotions, but also to reclaim my narrative. I signed up for an online memoir workshop and connected with other budding writers. Through weekly assignments and peer feedback, I learned to shape my stories with clarity and heart. By the end of the semester, I'd completed a 3,000-word piece that wove humor and honesty into life lessons about generosity and self-respect. My instructor encouraged me to submit it to a local literary magazine. When they accepted it for their Voices of Wisdom issue, I felt a surge of pride that had nothing to do with the kitchen stove or bank statements. It was purely mine. Meanwhile, my friend Georgia, an energetic retiree in New York, turned her lifelong passion for baking into a small business. She'd always made award-winning biscotti for family gatherings, but never thought to sell it. I convinced her to open an Etsy shop, Grandma's Biscotti Kund, complete with photos of her flour-dusted countertops and handwritten recipe cards. Within weeks, she was shipping orders nationwide. For Georgia, baking became more than a loving gesture. It was an entrepreneurial adventure that reminded her creativity and experience had real value. Inspired by her success, I considered how I might blend my new skills into a side venture, perhaps story coaching for older adults' art classes at the community center, or even selling small, original prints of my sketches. The idea of monetizing my passions felt less about profit and more about honoring my identity outside family roles. In addition to creativity, I explored physical well-being. I joined a gentle yoga class for seniors where mornings started with stretches and ended with guided meditation. The instructor, a former nurse, herself emphasized the mind-body connection. Caring for yourself isn't selfish. It amplifies your capacity to care for others. Each class left me more aware of my posture, my breath, and the possibility of moving through life with ease rather than fatigue. I also started walking with a group of women my age, meeting twice a week at the city park. We talked about books we were reading, recipes we wanted to try, and memories from decades past. Those walks grounded me in the present moment and reminded me that community extends beyond family. My support circle from Taking Back Tuesdays encouraged me to keep exploring new interests and to celebrate each discovery, no matter how small. As I ventured further into self-reflection, I realized that redefining my self-worth wasn't a one-time event. It was an ongoing process. It required patience, curiosity, and the willingness to feel a bit awkward trying new things. But each step reinforced a powerful truth. My value isn't conditional on what I do for others. It's inherent in who I am. Here are a few insights I gathered along the way. Rediscovery is restorative. Picking up old hobbies rekindles joy you might have forgotten. Those first tentative pencil strokes or clumsy yoga poses are invitations to reconnect with parts of yourself. Sharing enriches. Posting. That first sketch or submitting your writing can feel vulnerable, but positive feedback transforms insecurity into confidence. Self-care fuels sustainability, nourishing your body and mind, whether through movement, mindfulness, or creative expression, gives you the energy and clarity to engage meaningfully with loved ones. Community broadens. Identity connecting with peers. Outside your family opens doors to new perspectives, skills, and friendships that reinforce your individuality. With each new pursuit, I noticed changes rippling through my family life too. My son commented on how light my steps seemed when I arrived for visits. My grandchildren greeted me with the same excitement, but now I brought fresh stories, new sketches, and even a biscotti sample, courtesy of George's shop. My daughter-in-law asked for yoga tips when her back ached from late-night feedings. I realized that by investing in myself, I offered them a fuller, more vibrant presence than endless caregiving alone could ever provide. As the weeks turned into months, my apartment transformed into a cozy sanctuary of books, art supplies, and plants, each item a testament to my evolving identity. The walls held framed prints of mountain scenes I'd sketched. The bookshelf housed both memoir anthologies and blank journals waiting to be filled. The air smelled faintly of chamomile from the tea I sipped while writing morning pages. That sense of wholeness prepared me for the final piece of this journey, translating personal growth into a sustainable, actionable plan. I wanted to ensure that the lessons I'd learned didn't slip away once life's demands resurfaced. So I created a simple toolkit, a weekly me-time appointment on my calendar, a habit tracker for creativity and movement, and a small binder of resources, podcast recommendations, book lists, workshop flyers to inspire ongoing growth. In our final section, we'll bring everything together into a comprehensive action plan. We'll review the journey from multi-generational living through boundary setting, the quiet exit fallout, and reconciliation, building a support circle, and finally, redefining self-worth. Then, we'll lay out practical steps you can take today to balance generosity with self-respect, care with autonomy, and family love with personal fulfillment. Join me in Section 10, Long-Term Lessons and Action Plan, where we'll craft your roadmap to a life that honors both giving and growing. As I sit here in my sunny apartment, sipping a cup of chamomile tea and listening to soft jazz, I can't help but reflect on how far this journey has brought me and how the lessons I've learned might serve you in your own life. We've navigated the rise of multi-generational living, explored the power and pitfalls of financial gifts, felt the sting of invisible care, witnessed the breaking point of hurtful words, asserted control by freezing a trust account, reclaimed autonomy with a quiet exit, endured the family reckoning that followed, built a vibrant support circle, and rediscovered self-worth beyond caregiving. Now, let's weave those experiences into a long-term roadmap you can follow season after season to balance generosity with self-respect and family love with personal growth. 1. Establish clear boundaries. Financial and emotional. When I first set up the trust account, I thought transparency alone was enough. I learned the hard way that generous acts need guardrails. Going forward, define what you will and won't cover. List specific categories, groceries, utilities, tuition, and set spending caps. Schedule periodic check-ins. A quarterly meeting over coffee can keep everyone aligned and prevent unspoken resentments. Communicate your emotional needs too. If you need notice before visits or help around the house, say so kindly but firmly. By combining financial clarity with open conversation, you transform generosity from an invisible obligation into a gift everyone can appreciate. 2. Honor your autonomy plan, your quiet exits. Boundaries aren't just about saying no, they're about knowing when to step back. My secret apartment in Colorado Springs wasn't an act of pessimism. It was an affirmation of my right to a life beyond caregiving. To honor your autonomy, create a personal sanctuary. It could be your own room, a nearby Airbnb subscription, or even a reserved spot at the local library cafe. Pack emotionally ahead of time. Keep a small go bag, your favorite sweater, essential documents, a journal, so that if you need distance, you can take it gracefully. Establish a soft departure script. A simple note or brief text can explain your need for space without burning bridges. When you value your independence, As much as your generosity, you model self-respect for everyone around you. 3. Embrace community. Build and nourish your support circle. Taking Back Tuesdays taught me that shared stories are powerful medicine. Even if your schedule is busy, carve out a regular gathering weekly or monthly with people who get it. To do this, identify potential allies, neighbors, friends from church or book clubs, fellow retirees at the rec center. Make it low pressure. Tea and treats in living rooms or park benches keep costs down and conversation up. Layer in learning. Invite experts to speak about finance, elder law, or communication skills to keep your group fresh and practical. A support circle bridges isolation, offers accountability for your boundaries, and provides encouragement when you need it most. 4. Cultivate passions. Nurture self-worth beyond service. Caregiving can fill your days, but your identity is bigger than any role. My sketches and writing reminded me of that truth. To cultivate your own passions, revisit shelved hobbies, dust off old art supplies, open that half-finished knitting project, or plug back into a musical instrument you loved. Set small, regular goals. Whether it's one page of journaling per day or a weekly 30-minute craft session, consistency builds confidence. Share your work. Start a blog. Join a local maker's market, or simply give a friend your first creation. External feedback transforms private joy into public pride. When you invest in yourself, you bring fresh energy and perspective into every relationship. 5. Practice self-care. Sustain your physical and mental well-being. Boundaries and passions thrive on a foundation of self-care. In my yoga classes and morning walks, I learned that looking after my body and mind isn't indulgent. It's essential. To weave self-care into your routine, schedule it like an appointment. Block off me time on your calendar for movement, meditation, or a peaceful hobby. Pair it with social connection. A walk with a friend or a joint crafting session keeps you motivated and supported. Mix routines with spontaneity. While habits are helpful, allow space for random joys, an impromptu dance in the kitchen, or unplanned afternoon tea. Self-care ensures that you have the resilience to give and to receive life's gifts without burning out. 6. Implement practical tools. Your personal toolkit to keep these lessons front and center. I created a simple toolkit that you can customize. Boundary worksheet. Columns for household expenses, responsibilities and limits. Space to note review dates and any agreed-upon adjustments. Go bag. Checklist. Essentials. ID. A change of clothes. A favorite memento. Important phone numbers. Emotional items journal. Comfort tea. A small book or sketchpad. Community map. List of local groups' meetup times and contact persons. Church circles. Library clubs. Senior center classes. Schedule for Taking Back Tuesdays. Style support meetings or workshops you plan to attend. Passion planner. Monthly calendar marking. Creative or learning goals. Sketch sessions. Writing deadlines. Gallery visits. Space for gratitude. Entries to acknowledge each small success. By laying out these tools in a binder or digital folder, you create an at-a-glance reference that keeps you accountable and inspired. 7. Commit to ongoing reflection, review, and recalibrate. Life evolves, and so will your needs. What felt like a perfect boundary last year might need tweaking today. To stay on track, schedule biannual reflection sessions. Pull out your toolkit and ask, what's working, what feels off? What new challenges have arisen? Invite feedback from loved ones. Ask your son or a close friend, how have you experienced my boundaries or contributions lately? Be willing to adjust. If your trust account structure needs updating, or if you want to try a new hobby, give yourself permission to evolve. Reflection ensures that you stay aligned with your values and retain the freedom to grow. When I embarked on this journey, I never imagined I'd find such clarity, community, and creativity along the way. I thought I was simply stepping into a family home to provide help, and instead, I discovered the value of providing help on my own terms. I learned that love flourishes best when paired with respect, that autonomy isn't a luxury, it's a necessity, and that our worth extends by and beyond the roles we play. If there's one message I hope you take from these 10 sections, it's this: you deserve to be seen, heard, and honored in your generosity and in your individuality. The strategies I've shared aren't just about one family's story. They're universal tools for anyone seeking balance between giving and receiving, between family bonds and personal boundaries. Now it's your turn. Pick one element from the action plan. Maybe it's defining a boundary worksheet. Maybe it's scheduling your first quiet exit getaway. Or maybe it's dusting off an old passion project. Take that step. And remember, you don't have to walk this path alone. Build your support circle, share your triumphs and stumbles, and lean on the community around you. Thank you for joining me on this journey. May your future chapters be filled with both the joy of caring for others and the fulfillment of caring for yourself.